Hello, this is Graphic Policy Radio. This is your host, Elana Levin, aka Elana Brooklyn, and we've got something different for you this week. For a change, I'm the one being interviewed. Editor of The Fabulist, an awesome website and newsletter, Josh Wilson, came to me because he wanted to interview an expert about Jean Grey, given the movie opening this past week. And I said yes. And as we began to talk, we realized this would be a great podcast episode. So we've got the tables turned right now, and you'll be listening to Josh Wilson interview me about Jean Grey and the Phoenix and X-Men comics, because I'm certainly not going to be watching a bad X-Men movie. So let's spend some time talking about what's great about the character and some of the stumbling blocks that we've had with her along the way, too.
My name is Josh Wilson, and on this side, it's the first podcast for The Fabulist, which you can find online at the-fabulist.org. And this is also your podcast, too.
Yes. Graphic Policy Radio, where comics and politics meet, on iTunes, SoundCloud. I finally got us up on Spotify. And, really our bread and butter is interviewing people who write comics, and also discussing comics and comic-related media with people who are bringing to bear analysis on queer theory, racial justice activists, and people who just sort of have a particularly political, analytical approach to looking at art and culture and society. But all about geek culture, so comics and movies that are related to science fiction and things like that. And I've been doing this since 2012, which is crazy when I think about it, like before podcasts were even that popular. So yeah. And graphicpolicy.com has the bulk of my critical writing on it, which is, usually comic stuff, but I've also written for Comics Beat. I've written for Wired.com. I did one of their pieces for Captain Marvel. I had a big piece on Jack Kirby's work and Donald Trump over at the Daily Beast. So I've been in a number of different places, and I guess the best place to find most of my work is I'm on Twitter, probably too much, at ELANA_Brooklyn. That's Elana_Brooklyn.
Awesome. Getting started in this conversation, we are going to talk about most of what you discussed, politics and policy and a little bit of queer theory and geeking out in general. And our subject at hand today is Jean Grey and the Phoenix and Dark Phoenix. And there's a lot to say, of course, about Jean. But rather than preload this conversation, I wonder if we could just get right to it. And I want to just open up some terrain here for you to offer. Yeah.
Oh, real quick, though, do you want to do a quick introduction to The Fabulist for people who don't know?
Oh, of course. For the Graphic Policy listeners, yes. The Fabulist, Words and Art, is started out as a sort of hobby blog for my own fiction, and I started getting submissions, which were much better than what I published, so I took down my work. None of it's on there now. And it's become its own sort of little literary blog and website. We are listed in a couple different writers' markets, and I get submissions from MFAs and their professors and aspirants and occasionally represented authors, and we have a small team out here. And we're going to be expanding and changing our URL to fabulistmagazine.com. We have we've been publishing since 2007 and have a ton of mostly fantastical fiction of all sorts, and fables, yarns, and tales was our old motto, and we're now expanding to do reviews and critical commentary as well. And you can find that you will always be able to find it at the-fabulist.org, and hopefully very soon relaunching at fabulistmagazine.com.
Excellent. Cool.
Yeah. So glad to share this podcast space with you. And I just want to open up the terrain completely and ask if you have any succinct or even non-succinct feminist take on the character of Jean Grey.
It's interesting because Jean Grey began as a female superhero for whom her being female was like basically the only characteristic that she had. It's what we used to call the Smurfette syndrome, where there's one woman on a team of men and her personality is she's the woman. And yet, despite that, and partially because there was room made for it in terms of the way comics are created with different creative teams over time, but also because her initial power set itself was so powerful. Creators have been able to do really interesting, powerful things with her as a character. She's really, I think, a fan favorite in a way that some of the other, leaders of the X-Men sometimes aren't recognized to be. Like, people like Jean more than they like Scott. That's just a fact. Yeah. And I like Scott. I'm just like looking at the popularity grid as I see it. But I want to talk a little bit about sort of the origins of what makes the character work and what made the character click for me in particular. Because I was always someone who, I never liked the Smurfette characters in groups. I just always resented them. And I never really related to them very much because my personal characteristics were 100% not being a girl. So if a character's personality was being a girl, that was not relatable to me whatsoever. I was much more likely to relate to the snarky one in the group then. Anyway, so I think the first time that I read Jean Grey in a comic and I said, okay, she could be like a top tier favorite character for me. Am I getting ahead of us where we want to be?
No. Tell me about,
But I think the first time I read her in a comic and thought like, okay, this is a first tier character is during, and I'd always, I was interested in her a bit in the kids cartoon, which was the X-Men cartoon, which was my introduction to the X-Men, was from the cartoon of the 80s. There was an issue of, oh damn, I have the numbers somewhere, but there's an issue of like classic X-Men run. Oh shit, hold on 1 second. I'm going to look this up because it's going to kill me.
And while you're looking, I am embarrassed to say I never saw the X-Men cartoon, which is lame considering how much of a fan I was.
You never watched the cartoon?
No.
That's wild. Well, I mean, that's my generation. I was a little bit old to watch the cartoon, but I love that shit. Okay, so it's an X-Men 28. I'm going to pull out the credits for it. So, and this is X-Men rather than Uncanny X-Men. So this is an early 90s comic, not like from the beginning of where from the whole series. Devil 70s, in the House. Yeah. Yes, the comic issue is called Devil in the House. Andy Kubert does the art. And Fabian Nicieza is the writer. That makes sense. Yes. So Sabretooth, big scary villain, is being held captive at the X-Men mansion. And everybody is just freaking out and being afraid to deal with him. It's framed by like Jubilee having nightmares about confronting him. And Jean is basically the one person who she goes in there because he keeps begging for her to go, and he gets high off of psychic's energy. And he'd had a girlfriend who he'd basically been abusing to get her psychic buzz. And Jean,
Sabretooth has been doing this.
Sabretooth has been doing this, and he's been insulting various other psychics. Like it's mostly been Psylocke who's been working with him. And he's like, no, you're not good. I just want to have Jean. And Jean comes in and it's like, oh, you want me? Okay. She just beats the fucking crap out of him. So this character who literally everybody in the entire team is afraid of, she just terrifies him.
Mm-hmm. And that says a lot about Jean as a character, just her raw power, and I guess is... Yeah, I never underestimated it as a fan, but
yeah, it's and he tries to pull like, oh, you've got a crush on Wolverine. He tries to like mess with which I love her relationship with him, and that's another point. But like, here's this woman who, and she isn't just like, she's like fighting back using her powers, but she's just like completely not intimidated at all with one of the scary bad guys. And then after she leaves, Jubilee, who'd been having nightmares about Sabretooth, the next day has enough self-confidence to go in and face him, bringing him his food. So it's not just that she can take him on without fear. It's that her confidence in doing this inspires younger women to recognize that they can also approach these scary monsters themselves.
Yeah, so I mean, like, really, that is, I mean, she, I guess, through action and behavior, represents to some degree, I suppose, a feminist ideal of the female superhero.
Definitely. And she's a character who, ever since the Claremont era in the 80s, has really been groomed as a leader of the team. And is one of the most powerful characters in the entire universe.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so complex, that the story that people keep wanting to tell about her in the Dark Phoenix Saga is the one where, this woman superhero, her powers get too powerful, she loses control, she starts killing people, she goes bad, she's bad, she has to go die and sacrifice herself. And of course, then she gets to be reborn because, her name, she's Phoenix.
Right.
Phoenix is getting born and then reborn. And there's amazing interviews. If anybody doesn't listen to the Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men podcast and cares about X-Men, drop everything and go and listen to it. Their coverage of the Dark Phoenix Saga on their show is just the greatest thing ever.
And can you repeat that?
It's Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men. Explain as an EX Plaine, the X-Men. So it's Explain the X-Men.
Yeah.
They have amazing coverage, including interviews with Kurt Busiek, who had actually worked on, as an editorial assistant or in some junior capacity. He'd worked on the Dark Phoenix Saga. Had some really interesting insight into how that went down with the politics of having one of your big heroes go crazy and kill a whole planet.
Yeah.
And then the decision to bring her back was controversial, etc. But I think the thing is, the Dark Phoenix Saga being Jean's most iconic story is a mixed bag, because I just don't want it to be the only thing people know about her. That's the problem.
Yeah.
So having that be a big story about her was incredibly important and interesting, and was something that a lot of people related to. There was a really cool article that Sarah Century just ran for Sci-Fi's website about why so many queer fans identify with Jean Grey.
I saw that.
And with
it was great.
The Phoenix. Yes. So, go read that too, folks. But I think that I don't want it to be where the where the Dark Phoenix Saga is the only thing people know about Jean, but it is legitimately a great story. And the thing that gets lost when people act like it's the only thing about Jean is that, there's a really bad trope about, women getting too powerful, they can't handle it, bitches be crazy, and they go and blow things up. The whole thing is precipitated by two things that men have been doing to her. The thing that's the most immediately obvious is the fact that she'd been getting literally gaslit and manipulated by Mastermind and mindfucked for weeks and weeks on end before this happens. Deliberately. So somebody had been deliberately messing with her and manipulating her, and challenging her autonomy. And that was always so important for her. So this isn't just she was too powerful, and because she was too powerful, she lost her mind. It's no, someone was messing with her head deliberately, trying to make her mess up, and then she messed up. That's not the same as saying, oh, you're too powerful. Women can't be trusted with power.
Right. Yeah.
And then the other piece is that, folks, I didn't remember this at first. In the beginning of the series, the, Kirby Lee comics, they introduced Jean Grey as telekinetic and not having telepathy.
Right.
Predominantly because they wanted to have each character have a distinct set of powers, right? And if Professor X has got telepathy, then let's just have her be telekinetic. But later in the comic, they decided actually, no, she has both. And then at some point it was written in that actually Professor X had been suppressing her telepathic power because he didn't want her to be too powerful, because he feared that she wasn't, quote, ready for it or couldn't control it because she was a teenager. So she had already had her powers limited and manipulated by, even by her mentor. And having, had she been able to have more of a full life cycle of learning and adjusting to her powers, that would have been different. But instead, this man was telling her that, preventing her from even having the choice of using her powers or truly learning the fullness of her powers. And I think those are two pieces that really color what happened to her, and I think make the story particularly interesting and relatable.
Now we're looking in, inside the comics and seeing her gaslit and manipulated by these characters, these male characters. Is it do we feel okay about getting a little meta perspective on that and asking about the writers and the male writers and artists?
Very much. So I shared something just a little bit before this. There's an amazing website blog called Kirby Without the Words. It's created by Kate Willert, who's an amazing graphic artist. and she's done this project where she goes through original Jack Kirby Stan Lee comics and deletes Stan Lee's text bubbles so that you can just read what the pictures that Jack Kirby drew were. You know, in case anybody doesn't know, no, Stan Lee did not invent the Marvel Universe. There were a million writers working on it, and the most important among those was Jack Kirby, and then after him, Steve Ditko, and then John Romita. Like, the characters you know and love did not spring out of Stan Lee's head. They came from these artists. Anyway, so Jack Kirby was the artist who created X-Men and the Hulk, and basically everybody except for Spider-Man and Doctor Strange was created by Jack Kirby.
Yeah.
Basically, like, it's shorter. The list of people who were not created by Jack Kirby is shorter than the list of people who were created by him. In this comic, it is issue 3, X-Men issue 3. And if you're looking at these images, you can see the scene of Jean Grey listening to telepathic commands from Professor X, telling her how to free herself from being blindfolded. You move a knife off of this, they're at a circus. There's so many crime circuses in comics. It's hilarious. Move this knife off of a table, cut her ropes, and then cut the ropes of the other X-Men to free them. And you just sort of read this and you're like, oh my gosh, what an idiot. Like, why does Professor X have to tell her what to do? Like she's an automaton. And then you go and you look and you realize, once you're looking at Kirby without words, once you remove all those thought bubbles, what Jack Kirby drew is literally just a comic of Jean rescuing herself and them.
Yeah.
There's literally no reason in the world for there to be Professor X is not depicted in this entire sequence. It's just a sequence where you see Jean Grey using her powers to free herself and free her teammates.
Yeah.
Professor X isn't even in this. So what we had in Jack Kirby's art was a, reasonably feminist story of a team of superheroes getting kidnapped and the female member of the team using her powers to free everyone. Hooray!
Yeah.
And then Stan Lee was like, that can't possibly be true. I'm going to go and explain how Professor X is going to narrate to her how she's using her powers to get free.
Mansplaining.
And there's two things going on there. One, there's Stan Lee not trusting the readers to be able to follow the art, which is insane because the art is incredibly clear because, Jack Kirby is the greatest comics artist of all time. And two, Stan Lee not understanding that it makes sense that Jean would just figure this out herself. It's not requiring some specialized knowledge to private problem solve her way out of this problem.
Yeah.
There's no reason for it. So if you look at the art in these comics, even though Jean is written, very much as the Smurfette, as the girl in the group, that's not necessarily all just baked into the writing. This is kind of coming from the mind of Stan Lee in a lot of ways. I don't want to give the, perception that everything, it just all of the sexism of the initial characterization falls on Stan. But from what I've seen, that's largely so. So
yeah,
bear that in mind. I mean, there never should have been a team with only one woman on it in the first place, right? But as soon as Chris Claremont took over, he increased the number of women and brought everything together. And women love X-Men because X-Men are full of women, and it's just a big piece of it. But yeah, but it also helped that she's a character who's there in the team from the start. You can't have the X-Men without having her. You can't be like, oh, that's a diversity hire or whatever.
Right.
She was there from the start. It's creepy because you have Professor X professing how he secretly has a crush for her when she's a teenager and he's an adult, and it's gross.
Oh, really?
But it's minimal. It's like a blinking, it's not that much of a thing, and her relationship with Scott, I like that it's sort of them both pining for each other rather than it just assuming that men desire women and that women have no desires. And it's just, at some point you realize that you secretly love this guy or whatever. It feels like, we don't know that Jean likes Scott from the beginning, but pretty early she's considering Scott, she's considering Angel, she's asking these questions of herself. She has some interiority. Her interiority is driven by this romantic bullshit, but there's some there. And, but Jean really didn't hit her stride until the Claremont run. And I think everybody would say that they did create a character in the 60s who was a woman who had those really powerful powers is pretty awesome. But there also were, I find the telepathy, is sort of a gendered female a lot in comics. There's definitely male characters that are telepathic, but not as many. Or look on Star Trek. Like, who are the empaths on Star Trek? They're women.
Yeah.
And
Troy.
telekinesis, yeah. These are super powerful powers, but they are kind of gendered as feminine. But they're sort of the most powerful powers you could have anyway. I don't know.
That's an interesting thread to follow. And we have lots of awesome threads that came out of this. One thing, just for your listeners, is that I'm going to include a link to this Kirby Without Words post in the blog post that we and transcription that we post. And it is an amazing thing to look at. Kirby's art depicting this woman completely taking care of her own business. And then we look at I was astonished when you sent that link, and I looked at it. She's incredibly deferential when the words are added. She says, "Yes, sir. I hope it will not let you down, sir," and all this stuff. And really, a male writer imposing himself on the character. And if we look forward to what Claremont did, I mean, like, he really. The more I think about this, and the more I look at it, Chris Claremont brought a lot of. I don't know if progressive vision is the right turn of phrase, but Jean's passion and desire was right up there with Scott Summers. She was not, somebody he pursued. They wanted each other, and their passionate embraces were quite mutual. And she was not in any way a shrinking violet, and Claremont made her a leader.
Yeah.
Now, I sort of cut you off halfway when you were talking about the queer theory article. Is there anything you wanted to say about that in particular?
I mean, I think folks should just go read it. I think definitely, I feel like anything I'd say is just really recycling. I do think that, in general, like, her being really dramatic is something a lot of folks relate to, but but also her struggling with, does she need to repress her passion and her true feelings in order to be functional in the world, is, I think, really relatable for queer readers. And I also always appreciated with Jean is, like, of the main X-Men, the three characters who talked about politics, including real world politics the most, really were Jean, Storm, and Beast. Like, those were the three X-Men who you knew, like, read the New York Times every day, probably watched the McLaughlin Group. Like, didn't really read any of them as being, like, hardcore lefties like me per se, but these were like, these are people who were informed about politics and were the people who would go with, Professor X and, like, help him figure out, like, what the mutant political agenda looked like. And they were the people, like, them and Professor X were, like, the political leaders of the mainstream mutant community, really.
Totally. Scott Summers was reading Sports Illustrated. Wolverine was reading Guns and Ammo magazine or something, or Field and Stream,
exactly.
if you forgive me.
Yeah. And so I've always sort of read her as a political character who had really strong political beliefs and thought about that stuff a lot. And that also is a cool thing to have as a defining characteristic for, your woman leads.
I'm glad that you brought that in there as her not merely being political by her nature, but as a character, like being intellectually curious and having that level of sophisticated opinion. Beast is always the one who's presented as sort of the brainiac in a monster's body, but it's I think that perspective of Jean is adds a lot of depth to the interpretation of the character. And I don't know if you want to hazard this, but could we, in terms of the depth and complexity, could we take a look at Carol Danvers and Jean Grey as the two mega-powered female superheroines of the Marvel Universe? And I guess my familiarity with Captain Marvel really, I have to say, came through with the movie. And her as a mega powerful character through the movie, and she's got struggle and she's got identity issues in the movie. I don't know her much in the comics. She doesn't strike me as, and she's an interesting character, and certainly it's a thrill to see her when she pops the cork and is tearing through the Kree accuser fleet at the end of the movie. Just a thrill, but Jean seems to me like more of a complex and interesting character. Is there any comparison you want to offer there? Or?
Well, it's complicated. Like, Chris Claremont did something amazing when he had Carol Danvers in his hands. He did some really amazing things with her. I think that, you know, and obviously Kelly Sue DeConnick and the modern writers of Carol Danvers as well. I think like, I could really talk at length about Carol. I don't know that I don't really know that I'd compare them to each other as one being more complex than the other. I mean, I think that they have very different personal stories. You know, I think Carol, you know, joined the military because her dad wouldn't. This is the original story, but I think it's also still canon. Like, joined the military because her dad wouldn't pay for her to go to college, and was someone who excelled in the military in the 70s. Before that was like really a thing that women had as much success for. You know, the whole like, oh, she just really wants to fly a plane thing came, you know, was a later part in her story. You know, but Jean is definitely someone who is sort of predominantly framed as like an intellectual with really, really hardcore powers. And I think in a certain way, Carol is more of a brawler. And Jean will like destroy you, but like you don't get the sense that Jean like spends her spare time sparring for fun in the gym. And Carol is like, yeah, let's spar. This is great. So I feel like their personality, I mean, it's interesting because like I really think they're very different characters, which is really cool because so often these, you know, they're both quote unquote good girl type female characters, you know, they're both really powerful leaders. They're both heroes, not anti-heroes. It would be so easy for them to be really similar. And I don't think they are at all. And that's really cool. But I don't think that I would say Jean is more powerful or more complex. I think that there's a lot of stuff. I mean, the Carol's writing has pivoted, you know, a lot, as has Jean's. Like, I think that there have been periods of time. A lot of writers don't know what to do with Jean, especially men. I think that more women need to be given the reins with Jean. You know, I think like the best, I am not an X-Men completist, so there's plenty of Jean that I have not read.
Right.
I think like the two men who've done the best job writing her are Claremont and Grant Morrison. Oh gosh, and Greg Pak as well. He's great. Actually, man, the Grant Morrison New Mutants series, the moment that just knocked my socks off with her power in a way nothing had before is the U-Men are invading the mansion. The U-Men are a group of humans who steal body parts from mutants to try to augment their own powers. So this is like these are just like not just evil, but these are literally deadly appropriators of mutanthood, right?
Yeah.
Jean makes them throw up and shit themselves simultaneously to decapacitate them all en masse. And I just thought to myself, I love you. I love you so much, Jean. I mean, obviously it's Grant Morrison. Yeah, Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely on art there. But it's Jean. What a brilliant way to use her powers. And like, why doesn't people just do that all the time? Like, you know, why, you know, like mind wiping people and things like that. I think that's more, you know, messed up than just having them be completely physically decapacitated and grossed out.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I want nonviolent resolution, but if you're going to have a violent resolution, like that's kind of the way to go, actually. No long lasting, you know, physical damage. Sure as hell, nobody's going to be firing at you at that point. Like it's just a great way to decapacitate and incapacitate people. And they should do it all the time. Jean should just be going around making bad guys shit themselves and vomit simultaneously as soon as like they refuse to put down their weapons. That's just it. Let her do that. She's a human LRAD. It's fine. Because I do think that fucking with people's heads is really a violation in a very different kind of way.
Yeah.
Being like, you know, you're no longer angry. You don't hate mutants anymore, or whatever. Right. I mean, she's not a character she doesn't have this sort of like, you know, in DC, there's Zatanna, not through her own volition as much, goes on like a mind-wiping villains kick thanks to a really shoddy storyline called Identity Crisis. The less said about, the better. So, you know, X-Men doesn't have as much of and Doctor Strange mind wipes everybody all the time. X-Men doesn't have as much of a tendency towards that, but like there's some there for sure. I just would really like them to solve their problems this way instead of mind wiping people as much as possible. But yeah, that creativity that Grant Morrison used. And I also love Grant Morrison. He finally got Jean and Logan together. You know, when people are like, I don't really like, I find the dynamic of the complexity of the relationship between Jean and Scott and Emma and Wolverine much more interesting than any particular individual pairing off of those characters. You know, I don't ship any of them as couples. I ship the drama, right?
Yeah.
And I really appreciated Grant Morrison being like the first one to like really bite the bullet and be like, yep, they're going to kiss now. You know, like she's been with him since they were teenagers, more or less. And, you know, he's been with other people because she was dead and she never really had any other opportunity. And it's complicated and she deserves to have the opportunity to explore that. And as a reader, I would be perfectly happy for an unending love rectangle to proceed. I just don't really like, and maybe, and Emma and Jean can have a relationship too. Like just have that whole mess there be a thing. I definitely think like the complexity of her, too many people I think like are only interested in her in terms of her relationship with Scott, which I think is really weird. I think it's much more interesting for there to be more drama.
Right.
More drama, please.
You know,
I don't know. Do you have feelings about those pairings yourself, or?
You know, I did lose the thread for the Grant Morrison run, which is in my own personal life went off on a different jag in my life and went away from comics for the duration of Grant's run. So I actually get to go back and reread all that stuff and go experience that, which I'm going to do now because I love
really
Grant's
good.
work.
It's really good. I haven't revisited the whole thing recently, but the bits of it that I've looked at again recently, it was like, yep, lives up, still there.
No, and I remember. Sorry.
Yeah, that's all.
I was going to say I remember people flipping out about it throughout the 90s, like Grant Morrison, you should see what he's doing in the X-Men. But I did consistently. I just wasn't there at the time. And I also want to say really quick, as you discussed Jean taking out the U-Men, and I gave the credit to Grant Morrison, and you said, but it was Jean. I actually immediately felt guilty, because in a way I feel that Jean actually speaks through writers in a very interesting and compelling way. You know, Grant Morrison is a great writer and does amazing stuff with his characters.
I don't. That's not. I'm sorry. I'm like breaking up your flow. No, I didn't really mean that at all. Like, I mean, it's the creative team, and had it been obvious to everyone, it would have been used by then. Like, that's totally like a Grant Morrison and Frank Quietly innovation for sure. I think the general idea of Jean being a powerful character is like baked into the process, but that particular moment is, I absolutely just credit the creative team on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. No, that's fine. I am interested in this idea of this incredibly persistent character, you know, who's people, like you said, often the male writers don't know what to do with her. She keeps getting killed off. She's cloned. She's replicated. She's brought back to life. They kill her off again. They had a teenage Jean Grey. She ends up, I guess, sacrificing herself because Phoenix and all this stuff. And I just wonder in this, maybe I'm reaching here, but this sort of like, nevertheless she persisted era we have, you can't keep Jean down. She keeps coming back for more, and people, they don't really know what to do with her. She speaks through writers, and maybe they're not always good enough. You said you want to see more women writers taking a swing at her. Who do you think should be writing Jean Grey these days?
Ooh, these days,
and channeling her.
I know. I read a lot of really amazing comics writers right now. I think, you know, the thing, Leo Williams is just an unstoppable force of X-Men brilliance. And, you know, she's written a lot of Emma Frost, and the Emma Frost one-shot she wrote is like just an absolute definitive take on the character. I would love to have Leo Williams write Jean. I think she would be an amazing person to have on that book. And she would definitely just do it in a drop of a hat. Yeah, there's a lot of other people I can name too, but I think she's just like would be the perfect person on it. And I and like from the art standpoint, like it's interesting in the 70s, a lot of the comics artists it's interesting when they relaunched the X-Men with Claremont, and the artists who sort of did the new costumes and the new look for the new team. Basically, Dave Cockrum. I think he did like a style guide of her.
Huh.
And it was really smart. Like he actually really knew his take on what she would wear. I know a lot of 70s. I know a lot of fashion history period, but certainly 70s. He was like, I think she'd wear a lot of those sort of long, flowy pants that they have in Vogue these days and these sashes. And I was like, yep, sounds right. So like this whole lookbook he did for her, and I lookbook for her about her casual wear, and I was just like, yeah, no, that's totally nailing it. It's totally what, she's not a counterculture person, but she's not a square. She's a sort of, young and fashionable, but not someone who spends all of her time like fashion plate type person. It just thread that needle of exactly what I thought she would have been wearing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I feel like since then, the fashion decisions for her have kind of all been downhill. Like, I think Silvestri had his moments, but a lot of the time, I think people have put her in clothing that I don't think makes any sense for a woman with her particular life, with her particular position in life and interests. So I would love to see some artists who really understand fashion, give her, a look. I enjoyed the looks that they gave for young Jean with like, I think that, Jamie McKelvey worked on those, and everything Jamie McKelvey does is amazing. Those totally worked for me when he did those for young Jean. My thread. Oh yeah, but I would love to have some artists take on, giving her like a new wardrobe, giving her like really understanding her look and her fashion and stuff like that. Yeah.
I mean, all the X-Men. I mostly knew the Claremont Byrne run of the X-Men. Most of that stuff was pretty much, superhero skin tight, standard issue, with a little bit of daring sort of Hellfire Club and bondage and all that stuff.
I mean the streetwear. Like I definitely think that the costume, Jean Grey's had some wonderful costumes, like the green dress with this yellow sash, and then when it goes red, like the whole thing with the sash, and then her having that like the cat's eye glasses styled mask. I think she was the first character to really have that style, which then got carried on a number of different characters. That look is just like the most the cat's eye mask is a quintessential like, 60s, late 60s, like awesome style that was just brilliant and iconic and everybody borrowed. I love covering fashion in comics because it can be great, it can be amazing, and usually it's bad. And so there's so much to sort of tear your hair out over in those missed opportunities because, clothing are a part of characterization.
Yes. What kind of brought me to this topic to revise Dark Phoenix is they have a movie. It just came out, and I haven't seen it yet. It apparently is going to be a real stinker, and I don't know what I'm gonna go see it. I know that the buzz has been incredibly negative. Pal of mine was relentlessly putting down all the trailers and saying it looked terrible. And I don't go into comics movies expecting Kenneth Branagh or Helen Mirren doing Shakespeare. I expect a comic book movie, and you can achieve a lot of complicated and sophisticated stuff with comic books, but they're still as a medium not very complex. They're brash, they're spectacular. You throw in an anti-hero, and that's your sophistication, and there you go. Do you plan on seeing Dark Phoenix? Do we have any hope for Sophie Turner elevating the character from blah, blah, blah?
No, I'm not going to bother seeing it. I basically said if people came out of it telling me, oh my God, it's amazing, I would. But life is too short to watch mediocre superhero movies, especially when there's lots of really good ones, I'm going to be spending my weekend watching the new Brian De Palma movie. Sadly, I'm back to report that the new Brian De Palma movie is bad and racist.
Yeah.
I absolutely think that superhero movies should be held to, like, my time is too valuable. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I'm not going to see a superhero movie looking for the same things that I'm looking for, in like a really like auteur-led film. But it needs to be as enjoyable to me as that. And so, I can say, like, Black Panther, Thor Ragnarok, like, those movies are freaking great. I will defend those movies. There's a lot of things I really liked in Captain Marvel. And life is too short to watch bad superhero movies. It really is.
Could be a motto.
Even with the performances, And at least when they were bad in the past, there was a sort of campiness to it.
Right. Yeah. Which they captured with Shazam. I don't know if you saw Shazam.
Yeah, I liked Shazam.
The camp
Shazam
comes
was enjoyable.
through.
It does.
In a good way. Like, John Waters would appreciate the camp, I think, in Shazam. They didn't hide that part of it.
No, it was right in there. And
made the most of it.
Yeah. And and here they had this cast that includes some really excellent performers in it.
Yeah.
But I never trusted these filmmakers to do a good job about a movie where, like, a woman gets too powerful and loses her shit. Like, I was like, I don't trust this story with any of you guys.
Yeah.
And then it's not even very good. Like, there could be a movie that's good on a lot of levels, but its larger story point is like, yeah, that's fucked up, guys. This isn't even that, right? So.
Yeah. I was incredibly disappointed by Bryan Singer's take on Phoenix and Jean Grey at all. And, there have been some great moments in X-Men movies. But now it's part of the Mouse Empire. Disney bought Fox Films. Any thoughts on how that's going to work with the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
Well, I'm really concerned about media monopolies, and that ship has sailed. I do think that the desire to hold back on spending more on the movies until the merger is done. I think that there was like a deliberate lack of care worked in there, right?
Which is too bad given the quality of the actors going in there. And then Sophie Turner, what an opportunity for her.
Yeah, exactly. This cast deserves better.
Yeah. Humph. Well,
so I would definitely say if people are like missing Jean and they want some Jean Grey, this weekend, watch the old cartoon, Night of the Sentinels, and listen to some Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men podcast, and like read your comics.
Yeah,
read your comics. I mean, I'm trying to even remember. I saw only bits of the last movie, and it seemed like it didn't seem bad. It just didn't seem great, So maybe that is worth seeing, but I'm not even really making an effort there.
I mean, I assume you're the one where you're referring to the one with Oscar Isaac as Apocalypse. Yeah.
Yes.
Was that Last Stand?
No, Last Stand was the third of the old run of movies.
I don't even remember which one it was, and it was, I think, largely forgettable as a movie, except for Jean Grey blowing up Apocalypse, which thrilled me to my toes. I was so happy to see that. And
oh, good. So you thought it worked on certain levels, but mostly just on that level.
Her coming into her power, I haven't seen, or getting a taste of it. I haven't seen it enough. I mean, I saw it once. I haven't seen it. There have been no repeat viewing, so I don't have more of a critical perspective on that. But now I'm going to go find Night of the Sentinels from the old X-Men cartoon.
Yeah, the cartoon is, it has really bad animation production values.
Yeah,
but it has a strong sense of each of the characters, and it does an amazing job of condensing the best X-Men storylines throughout history into like a manageable sequential story. It's like quite an achievement there. And also, like, the women are great, and it's not sexist, and that's kind of awesome.
Yeah. And the Sentinels are certainly a fascinating and terrifying set of characters representing, the fascistic desire to exterminate the other and putting them into the body of robots. I guess, were they all pre-Terminator in terms of killer robots?
Oh, well, I mean, the Sentinels date back to Jack Kirby and Stan Lee in the 60s. So, yeah,
oh, really?
Absolutely.
Really? That was Kirby and Lee?
Yep. It's very early in the series as well. The world that hates and fears them. There's an amazing essay by Stephen Attewell, who's a historian, over at graphicpolicy.com about the X-Men and the politics of X-Men comics going way back to the beginning of the series, the Claremont, pre-Claremont, right? The Lee and Kirby comics, I highly recommend to check out. If you go and look up A People's History of the Marvel Universe and X-Men, you'll find them. And he actually really goes into the whole atomic age, paranoia, setting. It's well worth your time.
I'm going to dig that up and find the link also, listeners, for the transcribed version of this. I think we're probably coming near the end of this thing. Do you want to wrap up with any final comments or thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely think if folks don't really know the character, the Dark Phoenix Saga is really that good, but definitely Grant Morrison's run on New X-Men is, I think, in a lot of ways for me, the quintessential period. There's been some good Jean in the recent series, but my reading has been sort of patchy, so I don't feel quite ready.
Yeah, to go dig that up. And there's so much story and so much retconning and so many alternative takes on Jean Grey. One could write a master's thesis on it. Elana Levin, this was an awesome conversation. I thank you for having me on the Graphic Podcast and for being a guest on the first Fabulous podcast.
Thank you. Okay, cool.
Yeah, also, giving me a little insight on, Carol Danvers and Chris Claremont. I love the thought of Carol as a brawler. I want to go find those characters. So I learned a lot
if you want to, if you want to read good Captain Marvel, read the, there's two things. There's a few issues of X-Men. Well, the beginning of Carol Danvers, it's an X-Men annual by Claremont, where Carol first joins the team is this amazing feminist corrective to a really fucked up story from the Avengers. That basically in the Avengers comic, Carol gets raped and everybody acts like it's totally normal and nothing's wrong because Carol acts that way because Carol is like being mind controlled, and there never was any reckoning around it. And fans had complained about this. And when Chris Claremont was taking over the title, he was like, hey, can I have Carol Danvers? And the editorial was like, yeah, sure. He literally wrote an issue of X-Men where she addresses her old friends in the Avengers about like, hey, I was raped and you guys didn't do anything to help me. What's up with that? I'm going to leave you guys and hang out with the X-Men now. Goodbye. And then Carol Danvers was with the X-Men for at least a year, maybe a couple of years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I love it because it's an example of fans sort of being like, hey, this thing is sexist. A man who's a writer, who's a feminist, being like, oh, I hear you. I see what you mean. I'm going to do something about this. And then like literally doing it. And that's how you ended up with Carol Danvers in the X-Men for a while, which led to some interesting and complex stories. So
this was a fan-driven prompt that got Claremont thinking more deeply about it.
Yeah, exactly. And really changed the character for the better because he helped develop Carol Danvers' personality and character farther. And, and then obviously the recent runs by, largely written by, Kelly Sue DeConnick with a number of different artists on it have been really good, really good.
As we discussed that, we sort of open up another little bit of terrain we could tromp around, which is the female comic character as male fantasy.
Oh yeah,
and Jean Grey as male fantasy, and an interesting and complicated one because she's sort of a good girl, but she's kind of a live wire as well. And
yep. Yep.
You know,
She really defies
dangerous.
she really defies those categories. I think I'm glad you brought this up. I think that's one of the reasons why Jean is great. Is she just definitely does not fall into the good girl or bad girl camp. And I think that a lot of characters regard her as one or the other, but that's not true. And that tension is sort of like a key part of her interactions with other people. Yeah.
Sort of walking this line between, I mean, I do see a little bit of a line between the female stereotype and female archetype, you know, and archetypes of female power and personality. And which gets imposed on this character, you know. I mean, we saw it happen in that Kirby Without Words, where Kirby draws her as self-empowered and taking care of business, and Stan the man makes it all about, yes, sir, I will not fail you, sir.
She's crazy. I mean, and, you know, the characterization of her as being like bookish is legit and lasts and makes sense, but that doesn't mean she's like obsequious, you know. Come on.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yes, indeed.
This has been a pleasure.
Ditto. Totally. A great conversation. I really appreciate it.
So as we always like to say, keep it geeky. And don't forget to tell your friends that Graphic Policy is now on Spotify. So be sure to subscribe to us there now, as well as the usual iTunes. Have a great week.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.